For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On August 14, 1988, Maria Santos, 24, and Brandon Walsh, 26, disappeared while driving from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Their abandoned car was found 3 days later on a remote stretch of Highway 285, but despite extensive searches across the high desert, no trace of the couple was ever discovered. The case became one of New Mexico's most perplexing missing persons investigations of the late 1980s. For 22 years, both families held on to hope while enduring the agony of not knowing what happened to their children. Then, in March 2010, environmental researchers conducting a wetland survey in the Bosque del Apache discovered something that would finally provide answers to more than 2 decades of uncertainty. This is the complete story of Maria and Brandon's disappearance and the shocking discovery that revealed the truth 22 years later. August 14, 1988, was a typical scorching summer day in New Mexico, with temperatures reaching 102 degrees by afternoon. Maria Santos, a receptionist at an Albuquerque law firm, had taken the day off to drive with her boyfriend Brandon Walsh to Santa Fe for a weekend getaway. Brandon, a computer programmer at Sandia National Laboratories, had booked them a room at the historic La Fonda Hotel to celebrate Maria's recent acceptance to nursing school. The couple left Maria's apartment in Albuquerque's Old Town around 11:30 a.m. in Brandon's 1985 Honda Civic. Maria called her mother, Rosa Santos, just before they departed, promising to check in when they reached Santa Fe. The drive normally took about an hour along Interstate 25, but Brandon had mentioned wanting to take scenic back roads to show Maria some photography spots he'd discovered. When Maria failed to call by evening, Rosa initially wasn't concerned. Her daughter was responsible but sometimes got caught up in the moment during romantic trips. However, when no call came by Sunday morning, Rosa contacted Brandon's roommate, who confirmed the couple hadn't returned to their apartment. Rosa immediately called the Santa Fe Police Department, but officers explained that adults missing for less than 24 hours weren't considered priority cases unless foul play was suspected. The desk sergeant suggested the couple might have extended their stay or had car trouble in an area without phone service. By Monday evening, both families were frantically calling hospitals and police departments throughout central New Mexico. Brandon's supervisor at Sandia reported he'd failed to show up for work without calling in, which was completely out of character for the meticulous programmer who hadn't missed a day in 2 years. The breakthrough came Tuesday morning when a highway maintenance crew found Brandon's Honda abandoned on Highway 285, approximately 40 miles southeast of Santa Fe near the small community of Lamy. The car was parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights still blinking, the battery nearly dead after running for days. New Mexico State Police Sergeant Michael Torres arrived at the scene by 10:15 a.m. His initial report, later obtained through public records requests, noted several concerning details. The car doors were unlocked, keys in the ignition, and both Maria's purse and Brandon's wallet were on the front seats with cash and credit cards untouched. More puzzling, Maria's shoes were found on the driver's side floor, as if she'd removed them while sitting in the passenger seat. The car showed no signs of mechanical failure or accident damage. A half-empty water bottle sat in the cup holder, and a road map of northern New Mexico lay open on the dashboard, with a red circle drawn around the Pecos Wilderness area about 20 miles northeast of their location. The investigation immediately escalated when evidence suggested potential foul play. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Martinez from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office took charge of the case, establishing a command center at the Lamy scene. The area where the car was discovered was notorious among law enforcement, an isolated stretch of high desert where several unsolved crimes had occurred over the years. Canine units arrived by afternoon, with tracking dogs picking up scent trails that led approximately 200 yards from the vehicle before disappearing completely at a dirt access road used by ranch vehicles. This suggested the couple had been transported from the scene in another vehicle. The investigation revealed troubling context about the location. Highway 285 was known among drug enforcement officers as a corridor for smuggling operations between Mexico and Colorado. The remote area offered numerous hiding spots and escape routes through ranchland and national forest, making it attractive to criminals who needed to avoid detection. Interviews with Maria's family revealed she'd been receiving unwanted attention from a customer at the law firm where she worked. The man, identified as Thomas Reeves, a 34-year-old construction contractor, had repeatedly asked Maria for dates and made her uncomfortable with persistent phone calls to her workplace. However, when detectives located Reeves, he had a solid alibi. He was working a construction job in Las Cruces, 300 miles south, with dozens of witnesses. Brandon's background check revealed no enemies or concerning relationships. Co-workers described him as quiet and reliable, devoted to Maria and focused on his programming work. His financial records showed no unusual transactions or debts that might indicate involvement with criminals. The search operation became one of the largest missing persons efforts in New Mexico history. Over 200 volunteers joined professional search teams combing the vast Sangre de Cristo Mountains and high desert plains surrounding the discovery site. Helicopter sweeps covered hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain, while ground teams focused on arroyos, abandoned mine shafts, and remote canyon areas where bodies might be concealed. The New Mexico National Guard contributed resources including thermal imaging equipment and additional helicopters. Mexican authorities were contacted about possible cross-border trafficking, though the timeline made international kidnapping less likely. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back with no physical evidence discovered. The case remained active, but Detective Martinez acknowledged that without witnesses or additional evidence, leads were exhausted. One potential breakthrough came in October 1988 when a rancher near Espanola reported finding human remains in a remote arroyo. The discovery prompted a renewed search effort and extensive forensic analysis, but DNA testing, still in its infancy, couldn't definitively identify the remains. Dental records eventually confirmed the remains belonged to a different missing person from several years earlier. Throughout the 1990s, both families maintained pressure on authorities to continue investigating. Rosa Santos organized annual remembrance events and distributed flyers at truck stops and rest areas throughout the Southwest. She believed someone traveling the remote highways must have witnessed something suspicious. Brandon's parents, relocated to Denver after retirement, hired private investigators twice during the 1990s. The investigations generated several leads, including reported sightings in Arizona and Texas, but none provided concrete evidence about what happened on Highway 285. The case gained renewed attention in 1995 when a convicted drug trafficker claimed knowledge about the disappearance while negotiating a plea agreement. Luis Montoya told federal agents that smuggling operations in the late 1980s had used the Highway 285 corridor and that witnesses to criminal activity were sometimes eliminated. However, Montoya couldn't provide specific details about Maria and Brandon, and his credibility was questionable given his motivation to reduce his sentence. Detective Martinez retired in 2001, passing the case to Detective Ray Sandoval, who reviewed the entire file and conducted additional interviews with key witnesses. By then, the trail was cold, and many potential witnesses had died or moved away from the area. The rise of internet-based missing persons databases in the early 2000s brought new hope. Both families created websites and social media pages sharing information about the case. Age progression photographs showed how Maria and Brandon might look if still alive, though by then they would have been in their late 30s. March 18, 2010, began as a routine research day for Dr. Jennifer Adams and her team from the University of New Mexico's Biology Department. They were conducting a wetland survey at the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge, about 90 miles south of Albuquerque, documenting how recent drought conditions had affected migratory bird habitats. The refuge encompasses 57,000 acres of wetlands and desert along the Rio Grande, serving as a critical stopover for sandhill cranes and other migratory species. Dr. Adams's team was focusing on a remote section of cattail marshes that had been largely underwater during the 1980s but had dried significantly due to recent water diversions. Around 2:30 p.m., graduate student Marcus Johnson was collecting soil samples from a dried marsh bed when his shovel struck something unusual about 3 feet below the surface. Initially thinking he'd hit a rock, Johnson continued digging and exposed what appeared to be blue plastic material. Within minutes, the team realized they'd discovered something far more significant than scientific samples. The plastic was actually a blue tarp, and as they carefully excavated around it, the outline of what appeared to be human remains became visible. Dr. Adams immediately contacted the refuge manager, who called the Socorro County Sheriff's Office. Within 2 hours, Detective Captain Lisa Hernandez and a team of investigators were at the scene, establishing a crime scene perimeter and beginning the delicate process of excavation. The recovery operation took 3 days to complete, with forensic experts from the New Mexico office of the medical investigator overseeing the excavation. What they found was both shocking and methodical. 2 bodies wrapped separately in blue tarps, secured with rope, and buried in what had once been the deeper section of the marsh. Initial examination suggested the bodies had been in the ground for an extended period. The marsh environment had preserved some organic material while accelerating decomposition of others. More significantly, personal items found with the remains provided immediate clues to their identity. A University of New Mexico student ID card, though damaged by moisture, was still partially readable with Brandon Walsh's name visible. Near the second body, investigators found jewelry that matched descriptions provided by Maria's family 22 years earlier, a distinctive silver bracelet with turquoise stones that had been a graduation gift from her mother. Dental records confirmed what investigators already suspected. The remains belonged to Maria Santos and Brandon Walsh, the couple who had vanished on Highway 285 in 1988. Forensic examination revealed both had died from gunshot wounds to the head, execution-style killings that suggested professional criminal activity rather than random violence. The location raised immediate questions about how the bodies had traveled from the Highway 285 discovery site to the Bosque del Apache, nearly 100 miles away. The marsh area where they were buried was extremely remote, accessible only by 4-wheel drive vehicles and rarely visited except by wildlife biologists. The discovery triggered a renewed investigation led by a joint task force including the FBI, New Mexico State Police, and Socorro County Sheriff's Office. Advanced forensic techniques unavailable in 1988 provided new evidence, including ballistics analysis of bullet fragments and isotope testing of rope and tarp materials. Forensic analysis revealed the couple had been killed shortly after their disappearance, likely within 24 to 48 hours. The professional nature of the burial suggested organized criminal involvement rather than a crime of passion or random violence. The investigation focused on drug trafficking operations that had used the Highway 285 corridor during the late 1980s. Federal agents had dismantled several smuggling rings during that period, and investigators theorized that Maria and Brandon had accidentally witnessed criminal activity and been eliminated to prevent them from reporting it to authorities. One significant lead emerged from reviewing old DEA files. In September 1988, just weeks after the couple's disappearance, federal agents had raided a drug distribution operation near Espanola that used the remote areas around Highway 285 for storing and transferring narcotics. Several members of that organization had been killed in drug-related violence during the early 1990s, potentially taking knowledge of Maria and Brandon's murders to their graves. The tarp and rope materials were traced to suppliers in Albuquerque, but records from 1988 were no longer available. However, forensic analysis suggested the materials were commercial grade, consistent with supplies that would be available to construction or agricultural operations. Breakthrough evidence came from an unexpected source, a former federal informant who had been providing information about drug operations during the late 1980s. Carlos Medina, now 67 and living in Arizona, contacted the FBI after seeing news coverage about the discovery. Medina revealed that in August 1988, he had been working undercover to gather intelligence about smuggling operations along Highway 285. On August 15, the day after Maria and Brandon disappeared, he had witnessed a suspicious meeting at a ranch near the area where their car was found. According to Medina, he observed 3 men discussing problems with witnesses and making arrangements to clean up a situation. While he didn't witness the murders directly, he heard one man say they needed to move packages to a location where they'll never surface. Medina hadn't reported this information at the time because he feared for his safety and didn't realize its connection to the missing couple. He had assumed the men were discussing drug-related murders, which were unfortunately common in that criminal environment. 2 of the 3 men Medina identified were killed in drug-related violence during the 1990s. The third, Roberto Vasquez, was serving a life sentence in federal prison for multiple drug and murder convictions from the same organization. In December 2010, FBI agents interviewed Vasquez at the federal penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. The 58-year-old career criminal initially denied knowledge of Maria and Brandon's murders, but eventually admitted involvement when confronted with Medina's testimony and forensic evidence. According to Vasquez's confession, the couple had stopped their car near a ranch entrance on Highway 285 where they witnessed a drug transfer operation in progress. The smugglers, paranoid about law enforcement surveillance, assumed Maria and Brandon were undercover agents or potential witnesses who would report the operation. Vasquez claimed the murders weren't planned but occurred when the couple tried to flee after being confronted. However, the execution-style gunshot wounds contradicted this account, suggesting premeditated murder rather than panic killings. The burial location at Bosque del Apache was chosen because Vasquez's cousin worked for the refuge and had informed the criminal organization about remote areas that were rarely accessed by staff or visitors. The underwater burial was intended to ensure the bodies would never be discovered, but drought conditions and habitat changes eventually exposed the gravesite. The resolution of Maria and Brandon's case brought closure to families who had endured 22 years of uncertainty, but also highlighted the brutal reality of their loved ones' final moments. Both families expressed gratitude for the dedication of investigators who never gave up on finding answers. Rosa Santos, now 72, had never stopped believing her daughter would be found. She had maintained Maria's bedroom exactly as it was in 1988 and continued celebrating her birthday every year. The confirmation of Maria's death was devastating but also provided relief from decades of not knowing. Brandon's parents had died in 2007 and 2009, never learning what happened to their son. His sister, Patricia Walsh, expressed mixed emotions about the resolution, grateful for answers but heartbroken that her parents didn't live to see the case solved. The case prompted discussions about missing persons investigations and the resources dedicated to unsolved cases. Advocacy groups noted that advances in forensic science and database technology had made it possible to solve cases that seemed hopeless when they occurred. Roberto Vasquez was indicted on federal murder charges in connection with Maria and Brandon's deaths. At age 58 and already serving life in prison, additional prosecution was largely symbolic, but families felt it was important to hold him accountable for the murders. The environmental research that led to the discovery continued, with Dr. Adams's team completing their wetland survey while working around the crime scene. The incident highlighted how environmental changes can expose evidence from decades-old crimes, potentially providing closure in other cold cases. The Maria Santos and Brandon Walsh case stands as a stark reminder of how random encounters with criminal activity can have fatal consequences. Their weekend getaway became a tragedy when they inadvertently witnessed drug trafficking operations that were ruthlessly protecting their territory and activities. The 22-year delay in discovering their remains demonstrates both the challenges of investigating crimes in remote areas and the importance of never abandoning missing persons cases. Advances in forensic science, improved interagency cooperation, and environmental changes all contributed to eventually solving a case that seemed impossible in 1988. For law enforcement, the case provided valuable lessons about the intersection of drug trafficking and violent crime in remote areas. The Highway 285 corridor continued to be problematic for smuggling operations well into the 2000s, requiring ongoing vigilance and coordination between federal and local agencies. The family's persistence in keeping the case in public attention also played a crucial role. Without their continued advocacy and media outreach, the case might have been forgotten entirely, and the connection between the discovered remains and the 1988 disappearance might not have been made quickly. Environmental factors that preserved and eventually exposed the burial site highlight how criminal investigations can benefit from interdisciplinary cooperation. The university researchers who discovered the remains were conducting legitimate scientific work that inadvertently solved a decades-old murder case. The case ultimately demonstrates that truth can emerge even after many years, providing hope for other families facing similar uncertainties. While justice came too late for Maria and Brandon, their story serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of remote travel and a testament to the dedication of investigators who refuse to let cases go unsolved. As of 2010, Roberto Vasquez remained in federal prison, and the investigation into other potential accomplices continued. The remote areas of New Mexico continue to hold secrets from decades of criminal activity, and law enforcement agencies maintain hope that other cold cases might be solved through similar discoveries and advances in investigative techniques.